Hi, everyone. Thank you once again to the GBBC for having me. I always love doing GBBC events. It's where we talk about the stuff that really matters. It's the diving into the real potential of this technology for the use cases that matter. And I can tell you that this panel that we've pulled together, these guys are engaged at that level as much as anybody out there. So I think this should be a really rich conversation. But just to quickly start off, let's just go down the line, introduce yourselves. We'll go into a little bit more about what you're doing, further questions, but just if you don't mind kicking us off here, Antoinette, and then we'll move to Niyanta.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be in front of everyone here today. My name is Antoinette Marie. I'm a director at Heifer Labs. We're a group within Heifer International. We're an international development organization, and we focus on ending hunger and poverty while caring for the earth. My group in particular, we're focused on closing the digital divide for smallholder farmers.
Hi, thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm Niyanta Spelman, and I'm the CEO of Rainforest Partnership. What we do is protect, stabilize, and regenerate tropical rainforests with communities, indigenous and local communities, as guardians and economic participants, while we also foster connection between people and nature. Work in the Amazon and beyond, protecting those forests.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jude, Chidi, Ogene, and I'm the Deputy General Counsel of a peer-to-peer crypto company. But I'm really wearing a different hat today, and that's as the founder of Charles Winnsboro, which works with U.S. institutions to provide online certificate programs in high growth areas like cybersecurity, blockchain, AI, cloud computing, et cetera, to Africa's working professionals so that they can reskill and upskill and participate in future work opportunities from wherever in the world they happen to be.
Hey everyone, I'm Stephen Witte. I'm the COO and co-founder of Exchange.com. We're a regulated securities exchange out of Mauritius in partnership with the United Nations.
Jason, I think you had to put the mic on there.
Along with Alan Coney, who you heard from earlier, I'm the co-chair of the blockchain practice at Steptoe, which is a DC-based law firm. But for purposes of this panel, I'm here because I'm the director of the Blockchain Alliance, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that was created in 2015 by Alan and I in conjunction with Coin Center and the Chamber of Digital Commerce. And the mission of the group is to leverage the expertise of industry to teach law enforcement and regulatory agencies around the world not to be afraid of the blockchain and to actually embrace it as an asset in enforcing the laws and in protecting public safety and national security. And the Alliance has about 150 participating companies and government agencies on 6 continents around the world. And as you could hear from a lot of the discussion we've had today, our work is far from over.
Okay, great. Thanks for those self-introductions, everybody. I'm going to throw to Niyanta first because we were chatting out there and you gave me this big picture view about what's at stake, right? I mean, there's probably nothing more urgent, more important than saving the planet. So frame this, if you don't mind, why is blockchain or digital technology in general relevant to something like saving the rainforest?
So yes, as Michael's saying, we had a lovely conversation outside, sort of getting ready to speak with you all here. So think about tropical rainforests that make up less than 3% of the surface area of our planet. And in my lifetime, we've lost half of them. They're so disproportionately important to the balance and well-being of our planet. Regulate our climate, they regulate our water cycle, hold 50% of our biodiversity, they're host to so many indigenous peoples, the Amazon alone with 400 people speaking 300 languages. The natural technology that our planet evolved over millions of years, the greening of our planet and these tropical rainforests, they now need help from technologies that are just coming up, like blockchain and everything that goes along with it, to actually meet what the UN says we have to in terms of the dual existential crisis before us. loss of biodiversity, and climate change. So how do we respond today by matching those two? Because here's the thing, as far as I know, unless somebody here is going to say otherwise, I know of no technology right now, negative climate technology or renewables, that's ready at scale that allows us to meet the challenge without keeping our forest standing. So how does this room and our collective wisdom and experience and knowledge and innovative brains respond in a way that we need to?
So I love the framing of nature as a technology, and it aligns, I think, nicely with the ecosystem way in which we think about open source communities and the role that blockchain technology can potentially play in coordinating all of that. I think, Antoinette, maybe you could weigh in here, because you guys are there trying to take this technology, also applying a very holistic view, I would say, to all the different pieces. It's just blockchain magically fixes this is not the way to think about this, right? There are so many different elements. So in your world, where you're looking at the digital divide and you're looking at sort of empowerment and financial inclusion and so forth, how do you think about the engagement of this technology with all these other elements that need to come together?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for the framing. When we stop talking about change being about blockchain, we're starting to do it right. You can't just think about what is the application on top that's going to drive the change. You have to think about the enabling environment that supports that change, the community at the center, influencing what that product or what that service or what that outcome might look like, and then all of the connection points in between that enables them to participate in that change. And you heard just before about identity being a center point towards that. Well, how do we talk about identity? How do we talk about responsible carbon credit issuance and sales? Does that come back to our communities who are the active stewards of the earth? How do we talk about youth? And how do we bring them into the fold and enable their entrepreneurship to drive some of the solutions as well? And then what is all of the training and the capacity building and the support that's needed to bring technology responsibly to where these communities are at? Whether they have literacy issues, whether there's a discrepancy between genders in the ability to access those technologies, or whether it's in the infrastructure itself that needs to be built before we start talking about tokens and we start talking about DAOs and we start talking about wallets. It's a holistic perspective in the implementation of technology so that it can really transform community.
Jude, I'd like you to pick up on this concept of community, because I think one of the things that's been of interest to those who are paying attention, and not nearly enough people are, is that in the developing world, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, this technology is actually inspiring, and other technologies for that matter, these local communities of innovation that are acting and behaving and thinking in very different ways that necessarily is happening everywhere else. So describe that environment and how your solutions through the Charles Windsor Corporation are looking to further empower those innovative communities.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. Whenever I am on this side of the Atlantic, you get a little bit of feeling like Alice through the looking glass, because the discussions here are almost always couched, and to various degrees of politeness, almost always couched under the rubric of how do we help these folks in the developing countries get to where we are. And I think for those of us who have lived, practiced, interacted with folks there, you understand that you should be asking the opposite question. How do we get some of what they have? How do we get their energy? How do we get their chutzpah? How do we think creatively the way that these guys are doing? Because in spite of all of the constraints, in spite of everything that they have had to contend with, they are just harnessing creative solutions to these kinds of problems that we're discussing. I'll give you a specific data point on that. I think the most recent Chainalysis rankings just came out. And Nigeria, I don't think any African country cracked the top 10 under the various metrics, but in terms of per capita crypto adoption, Nigeria is number one. 32% of Nigerians have some form of cryptocurrency. Bear in mind that all of this is happening where under a regime, regulatory regime, where the CBN, the central bank, has all but outlawed crypto. So how is this happening? It's happening because they moved to peer-to-peer. Immediately they cracked down on transferring through traditional financial institutions. These kids, and they are kids, the median age in Nigeria is about 18. They all moved to peer-to-peer. And what they are doing in terms of transferring value through things you never would have thought of, gift cards as remittances, mobile minutes as currency. It's just astounding. And so I think, again, I'd like for us to see us reframe the debate a little bit more and say, how can we get some of the ossified institutions that are precluding large-scale adoption of the innovation that is taking place out of the way? How do we get them to step aside so that the youth, the dynamism of the youth can come to the fore and propel the kind of change that we want to see?
And just to pick up that a little bit further, I mean, so you're talking about this sort of, I mean, you use the word hacker out there, which I love, right? You've got a challenge, and how do I get around the problem of, taking money into a local exchange? Hey, gift cards, right? So that innovative power happening in very different environments there, you're looking to now find ways to, I suppose, legitimize or validate or give some currency to that innovative power through certification and so forth, right?
Correct. So the idea is that I'm the second generation now in my family, my father before me, to uproot themselves from everything they knew and loved in Nigeria to come over to the US and further their education. And I think it's worked out fairly well for us. But there are so many people for whom that was not an option. That's one. What about them? And the second is that there's a huge opportunity cost in terms of leaving behind all of your networks, all of your relationships, all of that. In those days, though, I came here 30 years ago, approximately. In those days, that was the only way you could do it. You could not avail yourself of a world-class education or world-class work opportunity other than by going abroad. The good thing that has happened in the intervening 30 years is that if Muhammad cannot go to the mountain, now the mountain can go to Muhammad. We can bring world-class education, world-class to people in Nigeria and elsewhere in the global South. And that way, they can bloom where they're planted, they can earn, they can establish these sort of networks where, because I am working, I am now able to send my brother's daughter to school. And she, in turn, as she goes to school, can earn. You establish these sort of network effects, positive network effects. And so if we can accomplish that, I think we will have achieved a great deal.
Okay, Stephen, let's take it to a different level, right? You're approaching this through a more traditional approach, building a regulated exchange, but you're really focused on Africa. Mauritius is your base. What are you looking to achieve, and how do you tie this model, this sort of more traditional approach to things, carbon credits and the like, to this sort of bottoms-up local community idea that Jude and others are talking about?
Yeah, so we're now a proud member of GBBC for more than a year now. So we're contributed to the first white paper, ecological market white paper, where we published a token taxonomy framework. And we, as Exchange.com, a regulated securities exchange that we're building out of Mauritius, are implementing this technology. So we're building a framework that's standardized with the proper governance model, that's core carbon principle like compliant, and also compliant with the token taxonomy framework. And we're building this on the XRP ledger. So what we do, we build market infrastructure solutions for African markets that enable African nations to really have the right tools in place that they can monitor what's happening, the issuance of credits, the parties involved, the financial flows, the whole journey of creation of a credit or creation of a green bond, for instance, the parties involved, that you have like a transparent mechanism and transparent framework and transparent like dashboard that enables like whoever has like authorization to have a look on what's happening, what's being issued, the right price discovery, like a transparent like market mechanism where buyers and sellers are with an open order book where they can trade these credits in a transparent market. So that's our goal, and we're now at the point that we built our carbon credit solution, and we're now implementing all the tech that enables us to trade these type of financial products.
Okay, Jason, for whether we like it or not, the framework that Stephen and his team are building to is one that is inevitably directly or indirectly established by lawmakers and policymakers here in the United States. And, you know, one of the things that I think is really striking about this conversation in terms of these wonderfully expansive ideas that people have and how to empower people at local levels and to use local communities to drive their versions of how they operate. One of the challenges, of course, is that framework is not necessarily designed for them. You know, how do we reconcile the innovation and the, you know, ideation that's happening in the blockchain space in the developing world itself with the demands of a US regulatory system that, whether we like it or not, everyone kind of needs to abide by, that is imposing securities laws that are pretty draconian by some measures? Is there a way out here?
Well, the short answer is no, or at least not yet. The long answer is somewhat more complicated. You know, as a number of people have alluded to today, the regulatory environment in the U.S. is anything but clear. You know, it's often said when members of Congress decide to demagogue about cryptocurrency that it's the Wild West, and that's utter nonsense. The problem is not that there's no sheriff in town. The problem is that there's a lot of sheriffs in town, and each one wants to control a different part of the town. And in some cases, multiple sheriffs want to control the same part of the town. And you end up with a circumstance where people want to color within lines, but they can't see where the lines are. I often describe the diagram of the regulatory framework as a Venn diagram from hell, but maybe better described as a Venn diagram drawn by somebody who had smoked a lot of weed. And when you can't tell where the lines are, it's very, very hard to comply. But that same problem affects you whether your mission is to build a product that's commercially viable, that is designed to make money, or you're pursuing an innovation that will change the world, make people's lives better. Because even if that innovation is occurring in Africa or other parts of the world, you can't fully tap into the ability of the United States to participate, and US persons to participate in those efforts if you can't work through the US securities and other regulatory framework. It's hard to get full participation from all the from the United States in efforts to fight climate change, you know, promote better medical care, educational programs all over the world if you're limited to accredited investors. And when there's an entire generation of people who are not accredited investors who very much like to buy a token or participate in a DAO or otherwise participate in your activities, I think that there's both a legal and a political answer to your question, Michael. The legal one is, unfortunately, it's a sad fact of life that lawyers dominate the world so much that you need a lawyer even if you're just trying to save the world. And that actually is very sad. Any regulatory system that is only good for lawyers is, as I think Jude would agree, not a good one. And so you do need, whether your mission is to make $1 billion or to save 1 billion people, you do need to make sure that you are engaged with counsel and that you're trying to figure out a way to navigate the U.S. regulatory framework. And it's, you know, the SEC obviously dominates the conversation because, you know, Gary Gensler wakes up in the morning and declares another token to be a security, and regulation by enforcement is his business model. But it's not just the SEC, because you could, you know, engage in gymnastics to try to comply with what you think are the SEC's rules and then rub up against FinCENs or OFACs or another agencies, because there often is some degree of conflict between the imperatives to comply with different agencies' regimes. So you need to look at all, you know, 360-degree view of all these different US agencies and make sure that you're charting a path that at least mitigates your regulatory risk. But the political solution, though, is is, and we talked about this a little bit before, is the use cases that drive the executive order reports that Alan talked about before, the things that are driving the writing and rewriting of draft bills in the space and regs in the space are not use cases about saving the world. They're about crime and ripping people off and stealing people's money. That's what's motivating the people who are writing the laws that will become the next generation of laws in the United States. What they need to hear is not just use cases about scary people stealing money and ruining people's lives. They need to hear use cases about how this technology will actually save lives. And it's not enough to go in and just say blockchain will save the world. That's too esoteric for an old person to understand, and I'm defining old to be older than me. But it needs to be practical and real. And one of the things that I love that's so inspiring about this entire day, and including the use cases that are represented at the other end, the other parts of the stage, is that these are real practical examples of how this technology can be used to actually change people's lives, not just across the world, but in the United States, because we've got our own share of poverty and social ills here at home. And so I think that there is a narrative that has to be rewritten when we engage with the Hill, when we engage with the executive branch agencies, in which we emphasize in a very practical and real way how this technology has the capacity to change lives if the regulators would just get out of the way.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't save the world without lawyers. Maybe we need to, maybe it's Hollywood's fault. We need to sort of reframe the idea of a superhero and then just be a super lawyer that's actually out there to save the world. And maybe that could be you, Jude, because you're a GC. You come from the legal world, but you actually had an interesting framing of what you see as the problem in terms of the lens, the perspective. And I mean, again, we'll pick up a little bit what Jason was talking about there about how do we change the narrative around use cases. But I'd like to just get you to frame it a little bit further in terms of US lens versus, say, African lens on regulation.
Yeah, no, it's thank you for the question. And look, if you look at what we're dealing with today in terms of securities regulation, all of these laws, and basically a lot of case law, Howie and his progeny, coming out of concepts that were defined in the 33 Act. And that itself was a reaction to the Great Depression, right? And people were getting scammed and all of that. And that's that's the animating spirit of these laws. And the SEC, I mean, assigning to them the most charitable of motives, they are just freaked out by the notion that people would just rip these poor, unsuspecting retail consumers off. Fine, that's a legitimate point. And so the volatility, for example, of Bitcoin freaks them out, right? What happens if somebody buys at 60K and then the next day it goes to 19? But when you talk about it from the perspective of African countries, and again, I'm going to use Nigeria as a use case, that's kind of turned on its head because, as I've argued elsewhere, the prototypical purchaser of a Bitcoin or a stable coin is old lady selling tomatoes in the market. And the reason she is trying to flip from the local currency into Bitcoin or into a stable coin is that she's deathly scared of holding on to the local currency. She knows Bitcoin may go up, Bitcoin may go down. The local currency is descended into hell, and she knows that. So why would she hold it, right? And so if that is the animating concern, right, then how might regulation change given that perspective? And I think that's what we have to bear in mind. So for me, a couple of things come out of this. The first is it would be a mistake in setting standards, and there's a lot of talk about standardization in the Western world and all of that, and more power to them. But there has to be room for understanding the different, concerns that animate, why people are turning to these instruments. And the other thing is that if, for example, the whole point of defining an instrument as a security is to be able to apply some measure of disclosure and anti-fraud protection, why don't we just do that? and get out from this sort of, obsession with defining what is or is not a security. I don't think you're going to be able to come up with the requisite precision, right? There's always going to be edge cases. So let's just apply, there needs to be a discussion about the appropriate level, of course, but apply anti-fraud, apply disclosure, and let's get out from under this debate. And so some of the new proposals, like, for example, Lummis Gillibrand, purport to address that, right? My whole point is, if you think about in the context of development in the developing world and the leapfrogging notion, where we went, for example, from analog telephony, skipped right over that to go to mobile telephony, we can do the same thing here in the regulatory context. We don't have to follow Howie slavishly and then figure out exceptions. We just don't follow Howie.
I'll get back to you because I want to take this out of the realm of the lawyers a little bit and down to the people who matter. Not that you don't matter, Jason or Jude. You're important. You're loved. You're saving the world. But Niyanta's actually, right there, dealing with the death of the planet, right? And the human beings who are critical to this. And needless to say, if we have to abide by a 1930s set of legislation that affirms that everything is a security, then we need to be an accredited investor. And I don't think there are that many Amazonian tribes people who fit that category, right? So yet they need to be participating in this. So what I want to do is how do we take the narrative differently? Because in some respects, we do need those regulators to change. We need policymakers to see this. And Jason was talking about use cases. How do we, and maybe it's not talking to the US, we're so US centric in this country, and we're here during UN week. How do we get the international policymaking community to care about these really urgent matters and think around solutions such as that which Jude was outlining to make this an easier process for innovation to help find a solution?
So there's several things. We were talking earlier. We think about the communities in the Amazon as being far away, being sort of, it's almost like putting them on a pedestal because they're sort of charismatic. We like to think about who they are. But think about the solutions they have. Think about the knowledge they have. How do we incorporate that? How do we bring them into the conversation? So, we get stuck with technology. We get stuck with regulation. But can we backtrack and say, what would happen? What would it take to protect those forests? How do we bring them into the dialogue? So I just about last month, what month is it? Just a month ago, I did the first Rainforest Partnership dialogue in the Amazon. Who would we have to take with us? When we sit on the top of a mother tree, how many people have seen Avatar, the film, right? You have a mother tree that sits above the canopy. And you sit on that tree and you look around the forest and, it's hard to see two species that look alike because that's how biodiverse that forest is, that many species of trees, and then everything it holds. What happens when you sit on a tree above there? Then you sit with a couple of folks from the community itself and people who work on that, and a banker and an actress and a biodiversity expert. And then you start thinking about, how do we solve this? You take yourself out of your own head, right? What about the fact that much of the land on our planet is not tidal land? Well, blockchain provides us that ability to basically do what you said, leapfrog away from these systems that don't serve us because we have that kind of an emergency. How do we get people to think? We know we can respond because we did to the pandemic. It was almost overnight, right? I mean, I don't know about any of you, but look, this panel represents several countries. We have friends and family on every continent. And it was the first time ever I had all this news from, my mother. She sort of keeps up with everybody. And we were all experiencing the same thing, right? We responded. We can do that. The only thing is that we think of it being far away. We're in this urban jungle, away from nature, not understanding how it works. And so it's not just about people. A couple of you talked about people. For me, it's about the forest, about nature, about our ecosystems, our biomes. And so how do we bring it in? And then there's several ways. I mean, you guys are the experts here on blockchain technology. I know what I can propose that I want solved. And Sandra there is nodding, and she's helping actually, because we're actually talking about creating a distribution system. Because here's the issue, and I'll stop there. There's a ton of money available, has no pathway down. So there's not just millions of dollars, it's billions of dollars. And then you ask me, and I'll show you and do the math for how that money does not trickle down. It gets deployed, pledged, doesn't trickle down, because nobody I know gets it. And we're very well connected to people all over the world doing this work. And here's the thing, there's no distribution system at the bottom, and we create that using blockchain. We change how we create impact, and we change the course for humanity and this planet that supports us and everything else that coexists with us. That's what I think. And this is the invitation to all of you for how we respond.
Right. So you mentioned the money, and people talk about, is Paul Brody in the room, or do you leave? I think he's left. But so Paul's done a lot of work, at EY, really trying to think about how do you unlock literally trillions of dollars sitting in the treasuries of major corporations that have committed themselves to sustainability initiatives and to investing their cash piles effectively. I want to get to Stephen about how carbon credits can be part of this, but before that, I want to go to you here, Antoinette. And there's how do we create, the reason why it's not being deployed, and we need trillions and trillions of dollars to get to our carbon emission targets. And is because they don't know where to spend it. There's no accuracy, there's no trust, the assets aren't there. But we've got data, we've got a provable trust. But I was just singing your praises, Paul, that's all. You don't need to. What is the number? How much money do we need to meet our emissions targets in the next? You come up with $30 trillion by some date. When is that?
I think it's 20 trillion over the next decade, kind of decarbonize power grid.
Okay, that's the power grid. Okay, $20 trillion. So it's a huge ask. But the other thing I was saying is that there are all these companies with these huge treasuries. So there's money to be spent, and we can create assets from the data. That's exactly what assets are. In this sense, it's like provable data becomes assets. So you talk a little about tokenizing all this stuff here, Antoinette. How do you see us tapping those funds and turning it toward the positive ends that we're talking about needing to reach here?
I think there's, off the top of my head, thank you for the question. There's two ways that I'm thinking about it. Can you increase the efficiencies of services that are necessary to support low-income communities in having greater incomes? And can you monetize data in order to do the same thing? So I'll give we're talking about use cases. I'll give two very tangible use cases that I'm starting to see have real impact in the communities that we work with. The first is around insurance. We know that climate change is creating immense disruption, especially for our farming communities. There's more variability, there's less predictability around each season, and that creates risks, additional risks to farmers. We know that farmers who are not insured have 10 times more difficulty in recovering from an extreme weather event than farmers who are. The problem is that the cost of insurance can be very high. We also have a problem of trust. I pay you today, and when I give my claim, where are you? And we have a problem of accuracy to confirm that an event has in fact occurred and that disbursement is valid. And so here we can implement a blockchain-based system to support insurance companies in becoming more efficient, in ensuring that those contracts can be trusted and that the money gets back to the farmer in a timely manner. The current status quo is we have to send somebody out to field, they have to confirm that something has happened, and then maybe in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, if it's really bad, they'll get their funds. If you implement a blockchain-based system and Acre Africa is doing a lot of work here with Etherisk and Chainlink to create an automated parametric insurance distribution that's triggered via data, has a smart contract that automatically sends the funds to the farmers within a day or less of the actual event happening. So that's one way that we can do it. They estimate that that's reduced the price of that insurance by 30%. Well, all of a sudden that becomes a lot more affordable, and farmers have a little bit more to spend on their inputs. They have a little bit more that they can use to invest in their production practices, which can result in higher yields, higher quality of product, and higher efficiencies. Let's look. Oh, am I going too long?
Keep going.
Sorry.
It was wonderful.
So let's look at another use case. Let's talk about access to markets. Let's talk about supporting farmers in verifying the quality of their production so that they can achieve a premium on their product without having to go through a certification model that may not be really built for them, or that may be a bit too expensive for them to engage in. But if we implement a blockchain-based system that certifies the quality, the origin, the practices that came before the sale of that product, then we can support them in accessing better buyers and a higher price for their products. At Heifer, Nepal, they've implemented a blockchain-based system to support the traceability of their goats supply chain. And it's effective. It supports our farmers in gaining a premium price for the sale of their goats. So that's another way. Let's increase their margins. Let's increase the quality, because they're doing all of the work, but they never had the data to show it. And now you provide them with a QR code connected to the neck of a goat, and all of a sudden you have all of the data right there in front of you. So that's another use case.
But what I love about both of them, and just focus on the insurance one as an example, is like you are directly solving the problem that we were talking about with Paul just then, right? Like you got this money that wants to be spent, but there's no market to go to, right? This is what capitalism is. It's the meeting of demand and supply. And that you can't, insurers want to insure people because they've got to make money out of it, but they can't insure if they don't have the data, they don't have the trust, and they don't have the structure. People want to be insured, but they can't be insured. So we create this framework. That is the power of this technology, as far as I see it. So I think it's a really great, thank you for bringing that very clear, a couple of examples there. So then why don't we jump to you then, Stephen? Because, you're there, creating an exchange so that those who have money can engage with this. What would you do with, for example, the examples that Antoinette just gave, and how can they be incorporated into a regulated exchange like yours?
Exactly. So in order to unlock those funds and to reinsure investors, you need to have the right infrastructure in place. So we're building a digital MRV model. So MRV stands for Measurement, Reporting, and Verification, where we can track and trace like status of projects, and also trace like the financial flows. So the whole infrastructure need to be in place to give comfort to a global investor base, to invest in like African projects, to invest in a sovereign bond, for instance. So you need to have the right infrastructure in place, and that will take a while to have that, but we're getting there. We built our MRV solutions. We're also looking at building data warehouses in African nations where we store the data locally, that we reinsure data sovereignty. And yeah, you need to have like constant dialogue with African nations that we have the infrastructure that allows us and reinsure and like global investor base to invest in African initiatives. So it's all about infrastructure solutions that you need to bring. And
So super lawyer, Jason, yeah, you're the super. I mean, he's Robin. You're Batman. Sorry, Jason. Jude's super lawyer.
I'll be Robin to his Batman any day.
But like, is this going to run afoul? Right? I mean, so let's see. Antoinette's just given us a wonderful example of how you would unlock funds for these farmers, push this thing in there. Stephen's giving us an environment which this can happen. But is Gary Gensler going to come in and say, sorry, that's a security, and I'm going to kill this constructive process? And if that's what he's going to do, how do we stop him?
Yeah, I think he's on his way now. I think he's in the lobby. Well, look, as I said before, it's not just him. If there's a flow of funds, then there's a question of whether there's AML rules and the Bank Secrecy Act that's implicated. There's obviously tax issues. Gensler and the SEC are the biggest concern, most top of mind at all times. And look, the only way to stop it I was a prosecutor for 15 years, and in fairness to the regulators, so I said a moment ago, need to get out of the way. I don't mean they need to completely get out of the way. What they need to do is reorient the way they think. They start the day, many of them at senior levels, with threat briefings that would scare the pants off of anybody in this room. And so they view everything through that lens. And I used to oversee the computer crime program at the Justice Department, and I saw everything through the lens of hacking. And every new application that would allow people to encrypt their communications, we instinctively saw as a threat to our ability to investigate and solve crime. And when your system of regulation is based on enforcement, and where the metric is number of cases you bring or the number of enforcement actions you bring, and not the outcomes that result from that system of regulation, then it's completely wrongheaded. So I don't mean that regulators need to disappear. I think regulators need to understand that you can have all of these values. You can have innovation that actually benefits communities in the United States and all over the world. You can have commercial innovation that changes the lives of people and brings about new levels of financial inclusion. You can have public safety. You can have disclosure-based regulation that allows people to make informed decisions about how they spend their money, as Jude was talking about, and that protects consumers. And you can have national security. You can have all those things. As long as your metric is not the number of cases you bring, it's the amount of opportunity you create, and the ability to have some of that opportunity occur in the United States, or to have people in the United States be able to participate in those activities if they're overseas. So I think the problem is reorienting the thinking away from being driven by fear and risk and threats, as Alan was talking about before, and make sure that it's focused on outcomes. I used to, just parenthetically, I used to be the chief violent crime prosecutor in U.S. Attorney's Office in Baltimore. My resources in my office were driven by the number of gun cases I brought. The murder rate could go up, the murder rate could go down. As long as gun cases are prosecuted, I got more money. I thought that was ass backwards. My goal was to bring fewer cases and have fewer murders. So the metric that I held our people accountable to is how many people got shot, not how many cases we brought. And if we had a year in which we brought fewer cases and got less money from DOJ, but fewer people died, that was a great year. And that's just one very off-topic example of how the federal government uses the wrong metrics to evaluate the effectiveness of the resources it spends.
It's talking about incentives, right? It's ultimately, we've built an enforcement system that rewards certain behavior when we should be rewarding other behavior, right? That's a core problem. How much time do I have? Because I haven't seen the card come up. I thought we were closing at 20 past. Am I good? Can we keep going? Okay, cool. I'll wait till the card. Sorry. My watch is wrong.
Gave you 5 minutes.
Excellent. Gary Gensler gave it to us? So that was hold them there. I've still got the arrest warrants. I just need to deliver them. Just wait. Stall them, please. That idea, right? This incentives, right? So I want to just bring this back to this idea about how do we align everyone's incentives, because it's a global conversation. It's like, how do we all see that if we figure out a system that rewards people for doing something that is in the collective good, that is where it is, right? Jason described an environment in which it's not, right? The government represents us. Their metrics should be, their incentives should be something that speaks back to that. But because of the way that we've sort of ossified bureaucracy and the way that we've sort of given it a structure that rewards different behavior, we're at loggerheads with what we need, right? And again, I'm going to go to you, Niyanta, because you've got this big sort of holistic way of thinking about it. How do you think about incentives and blockchains and tokens in terms of, like, climate change is the ultimate tragedy of the commons challenge? How do we incentivize everybody to protect the commons? And it's part of the technology, but it's also the conversations that we have.
So one of the things, when you talk about a regulatory side of things, why are we not? Because there's a lot that can happen overnight with the right kind of regulations, right? So if President Biden says tropical rainforests are really important to him, which I would have not believed, except he told me himself in 2014 when I was invited to the Naval Observatory, and he's done many things since for that. How do you actually make sure that corporations are measured, just like what the EU is doing, which they're talking about? I mean, this is not in the US, but in the EU, we're talking about commodities that cause deforestation. They're going to not be allowed to be exported, and there are going to be certain, certain things that whole law that they're proposing, overnight, it can change so much, it's very scary. Now, here's the thing. Can you imagine coffee, cacao, palm oil coming from any of the areas where deforestation is occurring, and suddenly that is blocked? It could be chaos globally. So, there's a lot that's going to go into it. So you can't just come up with incentives, but how do we think about incentives in ways for corporations so that they're going to bake it in to what they're doing? How do we ensure the consumers? We as consumers have so much power. Gen Zs make up 40% of the workforce. By 2026, the Zs are going to be 40% of the workforce. What happens when that generation says, we will not buy unless companies take out deforestation out of their supply chain? If 141 countries in Glasgow said they're going to take out deforestation, end deforestation by 2030, lovely declaration to make in Glasgow. What are we doing? What are the incentives? What are the laws? What are the regulations that's actually driving that? And I haven't seen anything. So it's like people like me saying, and people like me coming to you guys and say, help us create this, because they set a bar. And who's going to come in and say, okay, here's how we're going to help you meet this. And then we're going to come up with incentives that make sense, that don't mess things up, right?
Last word, Antoinette. I think it's a good one for you to close on. How do we get to this? How do we build the solutions rather than just make the declarations? I think is where Niyanta's going there.
Yeah, no, that was great. Give them the money. Give the stewards the money, or make it easier for them to access the money. If there's a liquidity gap and farmers and cooperatives can't get capital in order to invest in their practices and continue to be stewards of their lands, well, we can go around that. Let's crowdfund. Let's use DeFi to provide loans to farmers, or let's do peer-to-peer loans where we can leverage social capital and reputation to evaluate the ability for somebody to take out a loan, and experiment with how incentives can be used to continue to perpetuate the practices that we want to see in the world. We talk a lot about carbon, but what about regenerative agriculture? Can we tokenize ecosystem services that farmers are stewards of, but incentivize them so that they can earn more money on what they're already doing? So we can use blockchain technology to ensure that the money goes back to the farmers, and we can see the traceability of that money going back to the farmers. And then we can say, there's the transparency I was looking for. There is the impact. And there is an alternative source of revenue that's enabling this farmer to lift themselves out of poverty. And so when we start to believe in their ability to continue to be stewards of the land and perform the eco services that they do at scale, well, we can support that by connecting them to capital.
All right, there you go. A positive vision for where we want to go. Thank you, all of you, for this great contribution. A round of applause for the panel, please.